Welcome to The Focused View, the podcast for eye care professionals across Australia. Brought to you by Opticare. In each episode, we bring together leading eye care, optical and business professionals to share valuable insights, practical tips, and the latest trends shaping the optical business landscape. I'm your host, Michael Nasser, and together we'll explore innovative strategies for practice growth, patient care, and business success in the eye care industry. Whether you're starting your career, managing a practice, or just looking to stay ahead of the field, The Focused View is your source for inspiration and knowledge. In today's episode, we're glad to welcome back Erich from Acrinos. Erich joined us in an early episode where we explored the similarities and differences between the Australian and the US optometry markets. And today he returns for the first part of a special two-part series, focused on the life cycle of an optometry practice. In this first part, we'll dive into the emerging stage, the journey from aspiring owner to opening or acquiring your first practice. We'll explore the realities of buying versus starting from scratch, how to assess a market, the essentials of due diligence, and the foundational steps that set a new practice up for success. Erich brings deep experience from working with optometrists across the US, and his insights offer practical guidance for anyone considering their first move into practice ownership. So let's get into it. Erich, welcome to the show again.
Yeah, Michael, it's great to be back.
For those that haven't listened to the first episode that we did, which is out a few episodes before this, can you please give us a reintroduction as to who you are and what you're about and a bit about yourself?
Yeah. So, Michael, again, man, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of the show and for us to now spin out two episodes, continue that conversation, a little bit about my background. So I've got a company called Acrinos, and we have a very simple mission. And that mission is to make the business of eye care approachable, accessible, and profitable to optometrists who are starting, growing, and transitioning their business. And, through the work I've done with Acrinos, I've had the opportunity to also get very involved in the industry here in the US, working very closely with the American Optometric Association and a number of other organizations, and continuing to, advance the message of empowerment and learning and framework, and certainly paving a way for private practice optometry to really thrive here in the United States. And through that also, getting the opportunity to do a fair amount of writing and speaking and have great conversations like we're in the midst of here on The Focused View.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that experience that I really sort of want to touch on and speak to. Our last episode, for those that haven't listened to it, definitely recommend checking it out. The links will be in the show notes. But we really spoke about the differences between the Australian market and the US market, similarities and differences. And I think it was a really interesting deep dive with regards to those two markets and what potentially we can learn on that concept that, generally we're a few years behind and you guys are a bit more advanced with where things are going and from that business point of view in particular. But today I really want to sort of hone it in on the way you approach your advisory business, Acrinos, with speaking to businesses. Like you said, you like to make it approachable, you want to make it accessible, this whole concept of private practice. And for me, I understand that in an Australian context to be independent business. So, starting your own practice and owning your own practice as opposed to being a corporate. But when you're looking at businesses and advising businesses, what do you take to that approach? And I know that there are three sort of categories you put them in. And I guess sort of getting a bit of an explanation with that and starting to look at those three phases and then obviously speaking to those individually.
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. And look, what all this really ties back to is positioning a business to be best equipped to serve that market, serve that local community, right? You'll recall from that first conversation, we were talking about how fascinating it is, here in the US, the vast majority, estimated like 90% of patients reside within this really tight radius of their optometrist. It's fascinating, right? But really at the end of the day, what we're talking about is empowering doctors who have a vision and have a skill set, a clear clinical skill set, providing the scope of care to establish a business that best serves that community. I mean, at the end of the day, when you kind of boil it down to the least common denominators, that's really what this Rubik's Cube is all about. Now, that being said, we're also operating in the modern era where there is rampant competition at all turns, right? As well as online and what have you. So as it were, what this is really all about is looking at the business in the context of where that practice is in the practice life cycle as the emerging practice owner, wanting to get into a market and make it happen. Perhaps in being an emerging practice owner, you're looking to either cold start or purchase an established practice. Regardless, we can think of the foundational building blocks that are necessary to make that business successful in that community, right? Everything from the scope of care to what's being worked with in the optical, who are the strategic partners that the business is working with, how the business is marketed and engages its patients, right? So again, setting that business up for success in this early period of the practice, right? So then fast forward and consider then the established practice. Again, competing here in the modern era, oftentimes here the big opportunity is to adapt workflows, modernize workflows. Perhaps that includes, and when I say workflows, actually maybe we should be broader than that and really look at just modernize the business, modernize the practice. So we can look at that clinically as what is the scope of care we're currently providing in our business? But hey, what are some emerging or already established perhaps scopes of care that we're yet to incorporate into our offering? For other practices, the scope of care is there, already a robust scope of care, but perhaps the systems in some of these workflows, the day-to-day, are maybe a little, as we would say, old school, right? Yeah. Time to modernize some of this stuff, whether it's utilizing technology or perhaps, creating and adapting job descriptions and functional roles to more of the modern workplace. I mean, a lot has changed since the 90s, right? A
lot has changed in the last 5 years, I feel.
I mean, heck, absolutely, Michael. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. But I say that because those are some of the glaring opportunities for many. I mean, if you figure if a practice was started in the 90s or the early 2000s, many of them have kind of maintained that status quo. And by the way, when we look at the emerging practice owner, those practices that we're working with that are cold starting or purchasing the business, right? It's based on this premise and this understanding that this is what's functional right now. It's always about, you don't want to settle into that status quo. When you settle into that status quo, I mean, it doesn't mean you're not going to you're not going to do well for yourself, earn a decent living, but as it pertains to truly getting this thing to deliver to the owner the ROI, because everyone puts in the blood, sweat, and tears. Yeah. So it's kind of like, if you're going to do it, then let's do it in such a way that it's really going to be super profitable for you. It's going to cash flow in the way we want it to cash flow. It's going to be profitable so that you can do those things you want to do, whether that is take nice trips or do amazing things with your staff, or, I mean, it's amazing the things that many practices we work with in supporting nonprofits as well. I mean, it's all, it's the beauty of capitalism, right? That in the profit, those of us that are more into this, what I believe more of a modern approach to business and capitalism, which is very much about corporate social responsibility, being involved in your community, giving back, right? But as it were, in order for the business to do that, it's got to be thriving. It's got to be profitable. If we want to be able to offer the employee benefits here in the U.S., that's a big topic lately that we've seen a lot of changes here in the healthcare system as it pertains to, medical insurance and employee benefits, and a lot of changes around that, just given the sheer costs of care here in the U.S. So employee benefits are a hot topic. But as it were, if we want to be able to provide those benefits to our employees, it's got to be sustainable to the business. Yeah. Okay. So when we're looking at practices that are established and looking to take that next step, whether that's the next step on the bottom line, or sometimes it's the next step just purely in eliminate headaches. Like, hey, Acrinos, we already do well. We have great rapport with our patients. And there are certainly assessments and analytics that we are working through with the practice. But as it were, there's also just a lot of headaches that sometimes go into delivering that bottom line, in which case making some changes here and there could eliminate tremendous headaches. Right. Oftentimes we do see that ultimately impacting the bottom line as well, right? Yeah. So then we fast forward to this third phase of the business, and that's the legacy practice, ready for the transition. And Michael, here in the US, we have a ton of these practices that are well-established practices that I believe are just ripe with opportunity.
Right.
And that's very much, again, as I share with you, a lot of the work that I'm involved in, aside from Acrinos, also in providing education, working with the American Optometric Association, educating our future optometrists, right? Educating them on business principles, educating them on the process to practice ownership. And by the same token, Michael, there's many doctors who are sitting on practices right now. And probably many of you here and listening to us right now, you've been in your practice for 20, 25, 30 years, and you're ready for that transition. And, in this instance, it's really all about optimizing this business, right? Cleaning this business up, cleaning up the back end, cleaning up the books. There are certainly things that can be done in the business to make it more sellable. But by the same token, it's not always in the business's best interest to dump a bunch of money into it immediately before sale. I mean, that's very much a kind of unique case-by-case situation, if you will. But all of this stuff ties back to what all of it ties back to, no matter where you are, emerging practice owner, just starting out, getting your name on the map, competing in your local market. I'm established in my market. I'm looking to further grow or make my practice operate more efficiently, right? Or hey, I'm the legacy and I'm really ready to be proactive about planning the exit, bringing in the associate or finding a buyer. What they all share in common is that the day-to-day operating income of the optometry practice is taking care of all of those people that live in that community, all of those patients.
Back to serving the community.
Yeah, no matter which way we look at this, whether we're talking about scope of care and differentiation, if it is a practice that wants to work with insurances or the vision plans here in the US market, hey, okay, if you want to work with that, that is a mode of practice. But if you're going to do it, let's do it the right way and be sure that it's not being done at your expense and in kind of this broader equation, which is truly a broad equation. It ties back to looking at the financials, understanding cost of goods, understanding supply chain, and what have you.
Yeah.
But serving those patients in that community, optimizing the scope of care, optimizing the product mix, frames, lenses, the optical side of the business, and then meeting patients the way they want to be met in this modern era. And I know you and I have had some fascinating conversations just off camera about some of these interesting ways that the market is really embracing technology. And also through that, the ways that private practices can get in and really win, I mean, if you figure if you are that brick and mortar established location with patients coming through the door for eye exams, that's the perfect opportunity. Like, sure, there's a lot of competition out there, but you're in lead position. If they need to come to you first before they go anywhere else, you're in lead position. And that's where I think there's wonderful opportunity here in the US. I presume also there in Australia with working with independent eyewear. When you're working with the brands and the services that aren't going to be on every other store corner or the other big box shelf, not readily available on the internet, oftentimes at deep discounts, it's difficult to compete with that. It really is. So that's where there's a lot of, let's understand the market and let's curate a collection in your optical that very much matches what that market would want in such a way, though, that you're not selling yourself short by just having an Essilor Exotica product on the board, because that's...
Yeah. I mean, just in the things that you've said, my mind has gone a million miles in a million different directions. And I'm trying to sort of position my next question here because I've got so much to say. But the summation, I guess, from what I've heard is, and effectively what we're seeing here too, is that independent or private practice is really, I think, it's in a bit of a regeneration phase. And I feel like there's a real identity about what it is to be independent. We're talking about some of these things when it comes to workflows, modernizing scope of care, the ability to specialize in certain areas. And that as a concept is quite invigorating because 10 years ago, it was very corporate dominated and it seemed to be the way it was only going to be. But we're sort of coming out of the end of that and there is this opportunity. There's a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel. It's probably not the best phrase to use, but there is that opportunity, I think, that you're speaking of. But what I love about what you do and how you're presenting these things is at the core of it, from what I understand, and it is all the same thing. I mean, you've got to run a successful business, and running a successful business will have the same common denominators in and amongst the mix. But what we're doing here is putting a perspective on the position of the individual or the owner in the context of the life cycle of a business, and then basically categorizing that and saying, okay, well, what stage are you in and what do you need to be doing to be strategic about your next steps, considering your particular, I guess, timing in the optical business? Because the fundamental core of optical business hasn't changed forever, I believe. It's always been serving the customer, serving the community. How you are doing that and the position that you are in from a business point of view will dictate what is important for your practice and your patients, and tying that in together. So that strategic mindset of, emerging established legacy really puts a framework that people can start to contextualize, okay, well, where am I? And because I'm in this phase, what do I need to do to get the most out of my business? And how can I think about it strategically? And if I take it back then to the emerging practice, what are you seeing in the market with regards to, because it is cyclical. I mean, there is the possibility of that legacy to feed into an emerging and all that sort of stuff. But if you're looking, and you've mentioned it already before, with regards to cold starts or buying something new, what are some of the trends that you're seeing amongst younger optometrists or business owners in the US with regards to taking on this challenge of, the emerging phase? And if we focus in on that to begin with, buying new or established, what's your take on that and what trends are you seeing?
Yeah. It's fascinating. I'll say trend number one, there's absolutely a thriving and growing interest in practice ownership, which is very exciting to see. Now, that said, when we look at the landscape out there, the fact is there are a lot of businesses that have doctors that are ready to exit, right? So as it were, perhaps even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, going into ownership would have been more of a cold start mindset. But now we've got such a huge swell of doctors that are ready to exit that now, and I think I think we've discussed this, right? Anyone that's coming to us to even cold start a practice, it's always like, awesome, let's do it. But also, let's see what else is out there in your market. Right. We have had situations where a doctor wanted to cold start. Lo and behold, we find a practice that has existing cash flow, existing patients. Like, let's get in there and take this thing over and take it into the modern area and grow this thing from there, right? And by the way, there's a lot of fascinating ways. If Michael, part of the huge value of working with professionals in your business is things such as what a well-constructed business plan can afford you, right? When you start talking about these ways that with the right analytics and the right case put together and the right plan, you can go to a bank and you can get financing to do some really amazing things to get these things off the ground. And banks are not in the business of loaning money if they are not like 99.999% confident that they're going to recoup what they've loaned out. So, when you look at it from that perspective, getting back to it, I love how you kind of walks through some of these key pieces and how it's really all about still the same business principles. It's simply applied to the different phase that you're in within the practice. But particularly getting back to talking about these emerging practice owners and where's the big interest. I'll say this, whether cold start or purchase, that's going to vary. There's a lot of variables based on the market, based on your vision. I mean, if you were truly always had a vision of starting something on your own, or you always had a vision of taking something over, okay? But also things like control and influence, and also your own exit strategy, So there's myriad different things running into it. Obviously, the work we do within Acrinos, it's all the analytics, all the calculus. I mean, we do these comparisons all day. I mean, it's really exciting stuff. But I'll say this, what all of the emerging practice owners share in common, whether they're looking to cold start something or purchase something, is the scope of care and the offerings in the optical. So as it pertains to the clinical scope of care here in US, taking the comprehensive eye exam to the next level and adding some elective services to that, elective diagnostics with imaging, elective treatments, lid hygiene. I mean, the whole assortment of things. Clinically also, we're seeing the rise of specialty care. So this, in some degrees, we can talk specialty care in many different regards. So from a vision correction standpoint, myopia control, specialty contact lenses, fascinating what doctors are doing with all sorts of different technologies, soft lenses, as well as ortho K and different treatments, incorporating those into that practice as part of, again, we're talking about the new practice owner.
Yeah.
The skill level, the talent there, the ability is the best it's ever been. So for them to then be able to add that to their scope of care immediately out of the blocks, you want to talk about a differentiator and a revenue driver, because, we're getting into things that we're not necessarily talking about the limitations of a vision plan, right? We also have dry eye. So think interior, front of the eye, dry eye. I mentioned lid hygiene a moment ago. A lot of really fascinating things going on in that regard. Obviously, aesthetics. And then that's not to forget about the whole world of medical eye care. And I do believe, I know that's an area that we've identified. There's a lot of differences between the US and Australia. And I know also our peers to the north, in Canada, I've got many colleagues up in Canada as well. We have these conversations as they too are looking to advance scope of care across provinces. But as it were, if we look at the public health need, it's truly only a matter of time, because we need optometrists for education. And obviously education is going to vary globally, right? But if we can find ways for our optometrists to heighten that clinical care, that medical care, medical optometry here in US is another huge differentiator for that new practice owner, right? Because as we touched on prior, many of us, I suppose it's somewhat natural, it's human to kind of become set in our ways. So if a doctor started practicing optometry a certain way back in the 80s or 90s, there has been adaptation. Some have excelled in adapting, but for most of them, they've struggled to kind of fully adapt into these ways to fully monetize the services. That's where we're seeing a lot of these younger doctors. They still need the tools and the expertise to make some of this billing, pricing and billing. Again, this gets back to some of the scope that we do within Acrinos in doing what? Making practice ownership approachable, accessible, and profitable, right? But you got to have the clinical care. I mean, if the doctor has to have the clinical proficiency to deliver the care before we can start incorporating this into the strategy. So as it were, while we have the clinical and kind of scope of care side, we also have the retail side, the optical side. And that's where it's really fascinating in working with amazing brands across the board and, establishing independent supply chains and just so many ways to empower practices to excel. And I know that's, with the great work that you guys do in empowering practices to run their business independently. It's fascinating to see the success of these businesses also, Michael. And that's something very unique that we get to see from our seat. What we do in Acrinos is we understand the full landscape. We have practices that work with us that are members of all of the different alliance buy groups. So perhaps we're one of very few parties out there that can truly kind of compare them all. And I'll say this, in our experience, the most profitable practices out there are the ones who have the least tentacles attached from some of these larger global conglomerates that are in the vision space.
Yeah, I could not agree.
It's really fascinating.
Yeah, I don't have the analytics like you would have from that point of view, but when you do look at those really successful practices, they are the ones that are really doing things their own way, and they're confident what they're doing, and they're not relying on, a massive corporate to basically back end them or support them. So I can totally resonate with that. If you're sort of tying back to that emerging practice, and let's say you're a younger optom or business owner, what makes a good practice an acquisition as opposed to then, and I guess on the flip side of that, what would you be looking for if you're going to cold start once you've sort of figured out you're going to go one way or the other? Let's say you decide to go down the acquisition path. What sort of things, and very much at a top level basis, not deep diving it at all, what sort of things should one be looking for to ensure that they're not, straying down the path of, of darkness, I guess.
Absolutely. So, and I'll serve this up in two regards. One has to do with kind of the external aspects of it, and the other is going to be internal. So let's start with the external. The external being, let's understand that community. Remember, the vast majority of patients are going to reside in a very short radius to the practice. So the better you can understand the demographics of the community, the wants and needs of that community, the better it's going to position you to understand how there's going to be opportunity to serve that market, right? So there's all sorts of research you can do. You can invest in research. There's a lot of free online resources.
There is.
For those listeners that may be here in our US market, you can go find some census-backed data and find some really great drill down stuff.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have different data sources that we are purchasing. They're very deep dives into the opportunity there. So as it pertains to, again, for the emerging practice owner looking to prospectively purchase a practice, if there is a practice in your community that you've heard through the grapevine, you've heard through your peers might be on the market, externally, you can kind of immerse yourself in that community and seek to understand that community, right? Now, internally, that's where we're talking about where you perhaps have come to have a conversation with this doctor and you could start to get some information about the practice. And in that regard, there's 3 general areas I would invite everyone to focus on. And you can organize these in accordance with your 3 general areas of due diligence. That's going to be your financial due diligence, your legal due diligence, and your operational due diligence. So from a financial due diligence standpoint, this is all about understanding the finances of the practice, how profitable this business is, how it cash flows. And there's myriad ways you can do that. You can ask for financial statements, certainly tax returns. We can go in greater detail. You can go over to Krinos.com to learn about all the steps in the valuation. But, ultimately, the epitome of the financial due diligence is to have that valuation in hand, right? Now we look at legal due diligence. Legal due diligence really ties back to, hey, is this business sellable? Can that business owner sell the practice? Michael, in all of our years of doing this, and sure, we're only in year 5, but we've got a ton of experience over this time. We have never had a legal situation prevent a sale from happening, right? So you can feel pretty confident that from a legal standpoint, it's in good shape, right?
Yeah, understood. Just to clarify that, so in that instance, you're not talking about the financial aspects of it. You're talking about, is there basically a transferable asset? I mean, is it presented in a way that it can be transferred over to you legally?
Exactly. Yeah. Gotcha. And there are some other areas on this legal side regarding, like, for instance, regardless of if it's in a leased or an owned space, you're going to have to secure a lease.
Understood.
Like when you buy the business, you have to be able to take over a lease. So that is something absolutely that's going to be.
I've heard of that actually backfiring. Someone's bought the business, the lease hasn't gone with the duration of it, and they're basically been left in the pickle at the end of it. It's like, well, I've got to find another location, and I bought it over, that's a good point.
Then the third area is the operational due diligence or the practice management due diligence. Mm-hmm. And that is the day-to-day operations of this business and the production of this business. Now, remember, the financial due diligence is going to give us the dollars and cents, the P&L. Hey, how much profit did this thing make? Where do the expenses go? How much did the owner pay themselves? All those things. The balance sheet also show assets, liabilities, equity, and stuff.
Yeah.
But when we're talking operational due diligence and performance over here, this is where we're talking about how many patients did the practice serve? How many of those patients then purchased eyewear from the practice? How many of those patients did contact lenses, right? So understanding more of the operations that's driving the P&L.
Would that include the team members and the current staff?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. All of those operational functions. But the reason why I say invite our listeners out there, again, to the emerging practice owner looking to perhaps purchase a practice, is you're going to approach this. Think about your 3 arenas of due diligence, your financial due diligence, which we've touched on, financial statements. Let's understand how this thing is cash flowing. How profitable is it? How much does the doctor pay themselves? If I were to be the doctor, how much could I pay myself and still have money left over to cover the note to pay somebody? And by the way, please, y'all, if you want to learn more about this stuff, go to our web. We do have some really great assets. Got some really great learning videos also over at YouTube. Go check them out. But the reason why I wanted to bring financial statements up again is because it's when you merge your operational due diligence and some of these kind of production volumes, it's when we merge these with the financials
puzzle
together, this is where the opportunity lies for the emerging practice owner.
Gotcha.
Because this is where you can start to identify exactly the revenue value of the patient, right? From there, understanding the scope of care and the materials and products that are informing that revenue value of that patient. And then this is where it gets a whole lot of fun, because this is where you start looking at what a modern practice can look like and how you can take that existing patient population. What can you do to enhance their experience? How can you add value to their life? And that's where it's amazing how these emerging practice owners and newly established practices can really add a ton of value to people's lives by doing what? Advancing the scope of care, bringing on a specialty, offering myopia and specialty contact lenses, taking that optical and getting rid of all that old stuff that nobody wants, and like getting some really cool independent stuff. Empowering your team with the tools they need to really thrive and take it to the next level. Because at the end of the day, Michael, when you're buying a practice, what we don't want to see happen is where you come to just owning your job. You don't want to find yourself, and it happens. I mean, we'll get contacted from folks that's what they find themselves in. Why? Because they didn't invest in their business. They took a lot of advice from just random people on the internet rather than actually rolling up the sleeves, working with professionals to understand the business and put a plan together. But where I'm going with this is you don't want to own your job. You're going to be going to the bank to borrow money to buy the practice. So you're going to have to owe that money back to the bank, which you'll see when you get the valuation done. And when you come to ultimately settling on a price, it's going to be a price that's going to be sufficient that the business is going to cash flow enough that you'll be able to pay yourself a decent wage. You're not going to be able to pay yourself high on the hog wages as a new practice owner. You're just not. Now, the degree to which you can take that practice as is and take it to the next level, that's going to impact your ability to start paying yourself more as a business owner, which is different from a job owner, right? You don't want to own your job. You want to own a business. And when you start to apply some of these fundamentals to the practice, now you're running a business, and now amazing things can really start to happen with both the bottom line and just the everyday operations and ease of operations of the business.
And looking at it simply, if you're purchasing a practice as an emerging sort of person, and the business may not be emerging in its own right, it might be at a different cycle. And so you've kind of got your cycle as the owner being an emerging owner, I guess. And then you've got the cycle of the business. And what you're trying to do there is identify the opportunity as to which you can capitalize on, and being the emerging and perhaps younger, and that then might necessarily be younger depending on the circumstances, but they're going to come in with a fresh approach, and it's that approach that's going to enhance that, that practice to the next level. And so I think if you're looking at purchasing and existing, you're not purchasing it to keep it as it is, you're purchasing it and you're looking at making it better ideally. And that's, I guess, where the value is in a purchase. And if that isn't there, or let's say you're looking at then on the flip side, starting from a cold start. And again, I've spoken to practice owners in Australia that have done both, and they've both been successful. And there are different aspects as to why they've been successful. Fundamentally, it's the same. One of the main things is they start with the end in mind. So they've got that strategy in their plan. What's the exit strategy looking like? And so when you're speaking like this, it does encourage that kind of, dialogue too. So if you're purchasing it in the right way, or you're starting it in the right way, you're also hopefully ending it in the right way when that, and if that does happen.
Thank you for joining us on The Focused View, proudly presented by Opticare. It's been our privilege to share the insights and stories that resonate deeply with the eye care community. We hope today's episode has not only inspired you, but also armed you with the practical strategies and innovative ideas to help you enhance your practice and professional journey. If you found value in our conversation, we'd be grateful if you could leave us a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform. And share this episode with your colleagues. It helps us reach more eye care professionals like you and grow our community of visionaries. Stay connected by subscribing to The Focused View and visiting our website www.thefocusedview.com.au for additional resources and episode summaries. We look forward to your company again in our next episode. Until then, keep focused. I'm Michael Nasser. Bye for now.